writers, you're listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life Podcast, where we highlight an episode from our backlist that will bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. In this episode, we're exploring legal issues that indie authors should consider in this conversation with Maria Riegger from 2023. Maria talks about starting your self-publishing business, legal liability considerations, advice on copyright, and more. And while this shouldn't be used as legal advice, we learned a lot from the legal aspects of being an indie author, and we hope that you do too. Thanks so much, Maria, for joining us today. We're really excited to get to talk to you. We're going to dive into a bunch of, I think, super important, but people are kind of maybe like hesitant to talk about legal issues for the obvious reasons. But yeah, we're excited to get to sort of pick your brain on this. But before we go into it, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got your start in writing, both fiction and the nonfiction that you're writing?
Sure. Thank you, Tara and Laura, for having me. It's very exciting to be here talking with you guys. As you said, I publish fiction and nonfiction books. So I got started on the fiction writing first, and I've been writing stories my entire life since childhood. At some point, actually, it was around the time I was in law school, at some point, I had so many stories in my head that I decided to put them down on paper. And it was just a great creative outlet. It was very fulfilling after kind of working with drier text, and the type of writing I do is just not as fulfilling creatively. So I found writing out these stories to be very fulfilling, and I got a lot out of it, and I enjoyed doing it. So I had enough content that I began to publish first kind of contemporary romance, romantic suspense, and then I do have a line of kind of parenting and spirituality books. I'm a parent too, and I've had to deal with a lot of like healing from past childhood trauma and things like that. So I felt compelled to write about that and share that experience with other people. So I have a line of books on that. And then I'm also an attorney, and I practice corporate law during the day. And I found there was just a ton of demand among self-published authors for help with these kind of basic legal issues that sometimes are very difficult to pin down, and sometimes they cannot be pinned down all the way. But, self-published authors need some guidance at least. So I started, getting together some ideas for writing blogs on those issues that were of particular importance for self-published authors: how to set up your business, defamation issues, copyright, how to protect copyright, things like this, especially for self-published authors who are just starting out that may not have as many resources as authors who've been doing this a long time. So that's kind of how my book on legal issues for self-published authors came about. So I have a good amount of blog posts on some of these legal issues that are free on my blog, which is lawschoolheretic.com. So, and this book is kind of a basic intro to some of the really big issues self-published authors should be considering. And it's going to be the first of several books because it's just impossible to put every bit of detail on topics of interest in kind of one single book. It would just be too overwhelming. And I find self-published authors are just really overwhelmed by these legal issues. So I'm trying to break it down into really manageable chunks, right? So they can protect themselves legally and not have to worry so much about the legal business side, so they can keep writing, which is what we all want to be doing.
Totally. Before we dive into some of the legal issues for authors, which I think we'll probably talk about a lot today, I really liked your books that were legal romances. I thought that was a really intriguing genre. My mind immediately went to The Good Wife, and I want to know, how accurate is that to lawyer life? Was that an accurate representation?
So generally, I'll say I love that series, by the way. Generally, and I love like Law and Order because it's about procedural stuff. That's one of my like all-time favorite shows. So generally, these kind of legal fiction shows you see are really not reflective of how it is to practice law. A lot of the times, attorneys are very limited in what they can do because of confidentiality and other issues, right? So where these shows are sometimes accurate in kind of the demands of law firm life. Like you'll see people working long hours. In some firms, in some cities, people even sleep at the office, things like this. So it's not the norm necessarily, but it does happen. So it is a very, kind of high, fast-paced, very high-pressure lifestyle. So that's kind of the part the series accurately reflects. But as far as kind of the procedural issues, lawyer-client relationships, and some of the judicial procedure, that's generally not reflected accurately. I don't want to paint a broad brush, but that's generally just the case. I mean, they're fiction shows for fun at the end of the day, right?
Totally. Thank you for humoring me.
Sure, no problem. Absolutely.
Nice. So you talked a little bit about why you wrote legal issues for authors. So can you tell us about kind of is this your first nonfiction foray? Like, was this the first sort of area of advice that you wanted to provide?
So my first nonfiction books were the parenting and spirituality books. So it's not my first. I did write a kind of a small self-publishing guide too. So it's not my first nonfiction book, but it is my first nonfiction book on this particular topic.
Do you have any tips that you would give to an author who's going into self-pub for the first time and doesn't know how to kind of protect themselves as they get started in a new business?
Right. This is a great question. And there is a little bit of debate on kind of what's the appropriate thing to do. So like you said, you have to kind of treat it as a business. You kind of have to think about, you're going to be making a lot of money from books. There is a little bit, for most self-published authors, just some minimal litigation risk. It's not great unless you're writing about nonfiction books that are very high profile or biographies or things like that. Nonetheless, I'm a very risk averse person. So self-published authors who are first starting out, I recommend that you form a limited liability entity as your publishing company and self-publish your books through the entity. Because what happens if you're self-publishing under your own name, so your copyright page has your name essentially, you're self-publishing in the United States as a sole proprietorship. And if you were ever to be sued, you could possibly have to pay out from your personal assets if the lawsuit is successful. And that's what you want to avoid. You want to protect your personal assets and income and limit your liability to assets and income of the business. So to do that, you set up the limited liability entity. Now, there are some lawyers who would tell you that it's not necessary for self-published authors to set that up because the litigation risk is so low, unless you're writing high-profile nonfiction books. However, there's always some litigation risk. I mean, whether you're using somebody else's work in your own written works, or you're writing nonfiction or creative nonfiction, you're never without litigation risk. So my position on that is to set up the limited liability entity. And in the US, the most popular format is the limited liability company. And the cost to set it up is fairly low. Now, it's regulated by the state. So each state government has its own method for setting up the business and its own cost. So I can't speak to the cost for every state, right? But I go over how to set it up in my book. But in my resident state, Virginia, it's about $100 to set it up one time. And then every year you pay, I think it's $50 to maintain the business active. And you can, draft your articles of organization, which, represent kind of the day-to-day, how your business is conducted day-to-day. It's a pretty standard document. And your operational agreement, which is also a pretty standard document. And you can draft those yourself, have an attorney draft them. But the cost is fairly low, but I think the benefits certainly outweigh the cost. The potential benefits outweigh the cost. So that my position is to set that up, right, instead of publishing under your own name. Now, if you are ever sued, and even if you have set up the limited liability company, it's never 100% guaranteed that a plaintiff would not be able to recover from personal assets because there are legal ways of getting around the limited liability protection. And again, I go over those more in detail in my book. And it's fairly hard to do if you set up the limited liability company well, but that's always a risk. So you're never 100% guaranteed anything, but your risk is certainly lower as far as, your personal assets and personal income if you set up the limited liability company. So yeah, that's definitely the first thing I tell new authors. Set that up before you publish so it's ready to go. And you have, you don't, like if you publish under your own name, then set up the company and have to go back and republish your books under the company name. That's more of a hassle. And then it becomes a question of, well, when did you set up the business? And if you're ever sued, at what point, right, would your personal assets and income be protected?
I guess it's part of the step of authors viewing themselves as business owners, right? So having that sort of differentiator. This might be a silly question, but is there a limited name that you can pick? Because some authors have sort of like interesting LLC names, or some people use their own personal names. Can you choose anything, or is there a registry? Like obviously two people can't have the same name.
Yes, you can theoretically choose any name, but it has to be a name that's available. Like you said, the states have registries. And most of the states have online registries where you can search for the name that you would like. And the registry will tell you if that name is in use and active. And if it is, you cannot use it. That's right. Because that would create an issue of confusion, obviously. And the kind of one of the more important things to remember is when you're using the name of your business, especially if the name of your business mirrors your own personal name, you want to use the LLC abbreviation, or if you have a corporation, it'd be Inc., INC period, because that puts the other people on notice that they're dealing with a limited liability company. That's very important to do. And that's part of what we call respecting the corporate form of the entity. Again, I go over that in detail in my book, like how to do that. Again, maintain separate business accounts, separate business email, things like that. You want to maintain the business, your publishing company, as separate from your personal life and your personal accounts and things like that.
So a new author who's kind of just starting out, like you said, might not think about having to do this, like they don't have anything to protect yet. But you kind of talked about having an abundance mindset in the book. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was really interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. If you're thinking, like if an author, a new self-published author is thinking, oh, well, I don't make enough money from publishing to warrant any of this, right? Business formation and whatnot. Like you mentioned, Laura, that's a scarcity mindset, and I want authors, especially if authors are, plan to publish, if you just want to publish one book just to have it out there, that's totally fine. But if you plan to publish multiple books and start a revenue stream, an income stream, and maybe have this be your full-time job because it's more fulfilling, gives you freedom of, with your family life, well, those are all great things, then you want to think long-term. And like you said, you want to think about, I'm going to publish a lot of books. I'm going to make a lot of money from this, and I have to protect myself. And that's the abundance mindset I was talking about. Right. So that's kind of like what you said, as far as getting authors to think about this as a long-term business, as opposed to kind of the imposter syndrome that a lot of us feel like, can I really do this? Will people read what I write? I want authors to think more positively about themselves and about their business, and that's only going to be helpful. So this is all part of that. Yep.
And can authors have like multiple pen names under the one thing? Is that something as well? I know maybe I'm just getting too fixated on the name part, but maybe that's something to consider if you do use one name and then you have another pen name, that might be kind of some sort of issue of confusion. Right.
So you can certainly publish under different pen names through the same company. So in your book, you're going to have the name of the company, your limited liability company, as the publisher. So that's perfectly fine. I mean, if you could write different pen names, publish them under the company, you're still publishing under the company, right?
Okay, perfect. So with indie authors, a lot of people might see advice on different social media platforms, like different Facebook groups and things like that. A lot of it well-meaning for sure. But do you see a lot of misinformation on those sorts of platforms?
All the time. It got to the point that I had to stop responding because it was taking up too much time. And then people would argue back with me, and I would say, look, I'm not going to sit here and debate this all day with you. Go get a consult with a local attorney if you don't believe me. And, obviously I can only speak to the United States. I'm barred to practice law in Virginia, so I really can't even speak to practicing law in other states, because most of the issues we're talking about here are state law issues, except for copyright, which in the U.S. is a federal law, so it's federal court issue. But obviously, I can't speak to practicing regarding like defamation and things in other states. I can give like the general elements and things to be aware of. But yes, I see a lot of misinformation, and it's disheartening. But again, people are asking people online and getting these responses, and they really need to be doing their due diligence and even pay out to consult with a local attorney to know for sure, because I would not want anybody to be in trouble because they followed bad advice.
Right. That's a really good point, is to maybe use it as a research, but definitely make sure you're having someone with the legal authority to actually give you the advice at the end of the day.
Yes, absolutely.
So you spoke a little bit about the state level advice there. Do authors need to be aware of different geo-specific laws? So I guess I'm thinking about, in terms of the different privacy laws in like Europe and the California laws, how aware do authors need to be about this stuff?
Oh, they definitely need to be aware, especially if you have a mailing list with people from all over the world, which a lot of, most authors do. You're going to have to follow the privacy laws. And that obviously takes due diligence and extra research to do. And some authors hire out for that, either legal advice or whatnot, because it's too much to take care of or too much to monitor. But absolutely, you have to be aware of that. And that's tough because, as you mentioned, different jurisdictions have different privacy laws, and with the GDPR, people had to incorporate that into their mailing list because you may not always know where people are located or people move too. But definitely have to consider that.
So we were just talking about author Facebook groups a little bit and author social media. One of the things that we've seen coming up a lot in those groups is copyright cases, authors trying to trademark like certain words or phrases or series names. Do you think some authors are going about copyright in the wrong way?
As far as protecting their own copyright, their own works?
Yeah, or like people who are copywriting like certain phrases.
Right. I mean, so that's a trademark law. So you're basically trademarking the phrase, and that's tough to do. I don't know the end goal would be so nobody else can use it. So it's a revenue stream for you, possibly. That's kind of a long-term view. So titles of works are not copyrightable, right, in the US. So you can use you can have, in your book, you can mention the title of another book, and that's not copyright protected. You don't need permission to use that. So that would, you would not be able to copyright. It would be hard to copy or trademark the title of your book. It would have to be something so specific, right? And there are a bunch of case law jurisprudence on this, but it'd have to be very specific to be able to trademark it. And it would have to be something that's not in common usage, that doesn't have a history of common use and things like that. So, I mean, authors who are considering that need to think about what's the end goal here. Is it just because I don't want anyone else to use this? Is that a real practical use of your time and resources to try to trademark that? It's a long process, to hire a trademark attorney and apply with the federal government. It takes a long time. Or if your idea is to start a revenue stream, I mean, that may be something to consider. But again, you'd have to talk to a trademark attorney, and that's a federal practice attorney, to know how to do that. And, they would also be able to advise you on the possible success or not of that trademark application.
On the flip side of that, what do authors have to be aware of in terms of trademarked items? So I'm writing a book, the characters are in a restaurant and they're both drinking Diet Cokes. Do I have to worry about the phrase Diet Coke being trademarked, or how does that work?
No, so not usually. You could use trademark terms in the book. And I mean, some authors do put a disclaimer at the beginning, like all, trademark names are owners of the brand or owned by the brand or something to that effect. So that's usually not problematic, right?
Okay, cool. It's especially as we kind of refer to things like that by their brand now more than anything else, So it's good to know what we can and can't do.
Right. Sure. No problem.
We also see like a lot of services out there for authors. There's, I think if you try and Google, another trademarked word, if you search for like self-publishing advice, self-publishing services, tons of stuff comes up. So do you have any tips or help for how authors can avoid scams, or at least identify something that is maybe not legitimate? Yes,
that's tough. It's very overwhelming. It seems like there's just countless, like as you said, countless services for self-published authors. So definitely one good place to start is get the Facebook groups that you're in as an author that you respect, that are legitimate. Authors there will have recommendations, especially authors who have done a lot, who have published a lot, who are making an income from writing. Will be able to tell you, this, for example, this group that provides these services is legit, and this group not so sure about. Certainly, if you've never heard of a group, you want to do your research, do your due diligence, things like that, whether it's for marketing or other services. So, I mean, I go over on my blog a list of, curated groups that provide, or sites that provide services to self-published authors that I've used, other authors used, like Reedsy, for example, well-known, Kobo Writing Life. Obviously, everybody knows them. Those are all legit. So the question is then, like, the smaller groups that you may not have heard of, are those legitimate? So I would really caution authors with contracting with any service providers they don't have experience with, and they cannot have other people vouch for them. If you could have somebody else vouch for the service, obviously, that may feel more confident about paying. But it's always definitely go with I would start with the groups and sites that are just well known in the community. And, there's a lot of authors that provide a lot of self-publishing advice, like Mark Dawson, David Gaughran. Obviously, anything they recommend I would say is absolutely legitimate because they vetted it and they're recommending it. So they're associating it with their name. Obviously, they're recommending it. So definitely start with the people that you trust and respect. Yeah, definitely.
And I guess if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And nobody can really guarantee you sales or reviews, at least not legitimately. So if they say we guarantee a number of X, or yes, there are some groups that I think of like one or two that would say, we guarantee you X number of sales or you get a full refund. And if that's the case, that's not, I wouldn't necessarily discount that service provider. But yes, Sarah, in general, if they're offering a guarantee on reviews or sales, definitely something you want to pay attention to. Yeah, it definitely sounds too good to be true.
That kind of makes me think of vanity presses too. So authors, if they're asking you to pay them money to publish your book, stay away from those as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention was in your book, you talked a little bit about how you're allowed to use like the song name of like a song that a character is listening to, but it starts to become a bit more difficult if you want to use actual lyrics. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that process works?
Yes, absolutely. So Laura, as you said, if you want to use a quote from a song lyric in your written work, the general rule is you need to have copyright permission from the copyright holder to do that. And for song lyrics, you got to request written permission from the copyright holder. That's the general legal rule. So there's no like minimum you can use without permission. Like you can use one line or two lines without permission. There's no legal minimum. Like you have to request, that's the rule. You have to request permission from the copyright holder. So the procedure to doing that for songs is a little bit different for books and other written works. So for songs, you need to find out who currently holds the rights to the song. And in the United States, there are three big music producers. So you would search on their websites and you would find which one of them has the rights to the song, and they give you an entry. So the copyrights holder is listed in the entry. It's usually a company, music producer. So you have to write to that company directly to request copyright permission. And it can take a long time because these are big entities and they have departments within departments within departments to handle written requests for written copyright. So you'll probably be bounced around. You'll have to fill out a couple of forms and eventually you'll get to the right person. And there's usually a fee involved with getting the permission. And then once you get the written permission, you want to make sure you get a written permission and file it away so that if there's ever any dispute about that, you say, no, I have permission to use these lyrics in this book. And then you would want to make sure you write in the front matter of the book that you're using these lyrics with express permission of the copyright holder. It is a long process. I've done it and it took too long that I was like, I'm not going to delay publication of this book anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and publish. But it absolutely can be done. And it's not that difficult, but you just have to know that there's just a lot of steps. Yeah. But if you know where to look, it's not that difficult.
I was going to say at that point, it becomes so lengthy that you kind of have to weigh like, how badly do I actually need to use this song in my book? But
exactly.
It's very interesting, that whole process.
Yeah, it can be a little convoluted, but yeah, if you know where to look once you get the entry, you can streamline it pretty well. Usually you can send an email, like you don't have to send a letter, email the company and just stay on top of it. If you don't hear back within a couple of weeks, you can send a follow-up email and eventually you'll get to the right person.
So do you have any advice for somebody that might want to use a real person or an event in their book? Like how, does it have to be inspired by, like, how does that work?
Yeah, this is, oh my gosh, there's a lot to say about this. So this comes up usually in the case, like you said, Tara, like of nonfiction books, right? So you can write about real people. When you write about real people and it's obvious you're writing about X person, you're opening yourself up to potential litigation risk with defamation. So if the person, doesn't like what you're writing about, and can make a legal case for defamation, we can kind of go over the general elements of that. You're at litigation risk for that. So there's a couple things to consider here. So if you're writing a nonfiction book, one way to get around this litigation risk is to write a creative nonfiction work where you're not writing in first person, you're writing in third person, you're writing about a character who's maybe, like you said, inspired by events from your life or somebody else's life. But it's not clear that it's about X person. If you can't say, oh, it's definitely about X person, you could say, well, this could be this person, this could be this person, you can't really make a case for defamation because you can't say this is definitely about X person, right? So you could obscure details about the person, you could obscure characteristics and make it clear that, this is not, if you can't say, this is definitely about X person, it's really hard to make a case for defamation. That's one way people get around that. Now, if you're writing a biography about somebody, or you just want to write your autobiography and your characters are clearly from your life and that's clear on its face, yeah, there's litigation risk for defamation. One way you can get around that is to get signed releases from the people you're writing about, okay? That they will hold you harmless for any portrayal of them in the book. So that's one way you could do. Now, if you're writing an autobiography or a biography, that's something I'd recommend doing, is to get a release from the person. If you're writing a creative nonfiction work where it's not really clear who you're writing about, then I would not recommend you go to the person and say, hey, can I write about you? Because now you're admitting that you're writing about them. And if it's not clear on its face that you're writing about them, you don't want it to admit that, certainly not in writing, because then they could bring a case later. And some people would say, oh, well, this person would never bring a case against me. Well, I've seen a lot of strange things happen. So, I mean, people could always sue. Even if they don't have a case, they can still sue and make your life difficult, right? You have to hire a defense attorney and all these things. So, yeah, but those are the considerations. If you either write a creative nonfiction piece, or if you're doing the biographical work, you'll get a signed release from the person.
Speaking of bringing cases against people, there seems to be kind of two frames of thought around, say, if your book has been ripped off and is on the internet. A lot of authors tend to sort of see that that's just price of publishing on the internet. It's, you should be flattered that your work is getting ripped off. Where the other school of thought is no, that is what I've earned and I should be being paid for this. Just wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Because it can kind of feel a little bit whack-a-mole, especially online.
Yes, absolutely. So, right, it's all a question of how much resources and energy the author wants to devote to this. Okay, so if what you could get in damages and money damages is way less than what you would be paying out, right, to an attorney to argue in federal court for copyright infringement, you may not want to do this. It's going to be a huge use of your time. A lot of it's going to take up a lot of your time and your resources and your money, and you're going to get very little back. So that's just for a practical side. You have to think about that. Now, there's something you could do, and I know you guys have talked about this in the blog before, is in the United States, when you create a written work, you have the copyright of that work because you've created it. You don't have to do anything. You have copyright over that work. You're the copyright holder. So if somebody is infringing your copyright and you sue, what you could possibly get would be monetary damages and lost income from the book. And if the book has not sold that well yet, the damages would be, very, very low, and then that would discourage you from litigating. But once you create the written work, if you register it with the U.S. Copyright Office as a copyrightable work, then if you need to sue someone for infringement, like if you said somebody's publishing, your book online without your permission, and if you sue for infringement, the monetary damages you could get are much higher because they're statutory damages based on a federal statute. I mean, they could be as much as $100,000 or more. So in that case, if the damages are potentially much higher, I would say, yes, then that's definitely a reason why you should seriously consider litigating this. Because if you don't stop this now, who's to say that you're going to, other people are not going to infringe your books. So then you'd have to talk to a federal practice attorney, copyright attorney, and figure out how much this is going to cost generally to bring the suit. And then you can make a decision about if it's worth doing it practically, right? But I mean, you're always going to have to weigh that, the cost of your time and energy and resources on the suit. But I always recommend to authors, especially newer authors, when you have your finished work, it's got to be a finished work, to be able to register it with the Copyright Office, register all your works online, and there is a fee per work. But the potential benefit is great because then if you have to sue for infringement later, the damages you could get are way higher, especially for a newer author. So definitely something to consider. You could register your books with the Copyright Office online too and pay the fee online. So you don't even have to hire an attorney to do that, something you could do entirely on your own.
Nice. That's really valuable advice. I can see how your time could just be spent answering author posts all the time and just giving your insights because it's super interesting. But how do you balance that? How do you balance being an attorney by day, fiction writer, nonfiction, helping authors. What does your day look like? And being a parent as well, you mentioned.
Oh my gosh. Well, our son is almost 13, so he's fairly independent. So he doesn't need as much attention as when he was younger. So that's a good thing. It's tough. So basically, I mean, I take some time to dedicate to the writing. Like I'll be doing NaNoWriMo in November. So I'll be doing that pretty much every day. But yeah, I really try to pare down my life so it's not full of extraneous stuff that doesn't bring meaning to it. So if that includes activities too, you have to really guard your time. You have to protect your time and your energy with, for your family, for yourself, and if it's important to you, for your writing, and you just have to protect the time. That's the best way I can kind of describe it, is you have to, every time somebody asks you to do something or asks you for help, you really have to think about saying yes. You don't want to say yes automatically to things. So that's the thing, is just kind of want to, just protect your time. And sometimes that means you have to schedule in periods that you're going to be writing, or if you're doing like stuff online, periods you're going to be online, and you schedule time for marketing. And that helps a lot, because then if you schedule blocks, you can kind of more easily move from one thing to the other. And you don't have a lot of time, like unstructured time. If you're like me, you're distracted to do other things, right? Shiny object syndrome. So you're distracted by other things. And then before you know it, 3 hours have gone by and it's like, well, I should have done this. And I have to kind of schedule time to keep myself on track. Like, you really should be doing this. If you want to get your workout in, it has to be now. Otherwise, you're not going to get your workout today. So things like that. That's kind of the best advice I have, I guess, is protect your time and energy, schedule stuff, and then make sure you get your sleep, because I mean, you're going to need it to do all those things. So to have the energy to do all those things that you want to do.
That's advice that I think we could all learn from, getting more sleep.
Oh yeah. It's hard to do sometimes. I mean, it is what it is, but to the extent that you could get restful sleep.
Definitely. So what can listeners expect from you next?
Oh gosh. So I am working on some more parenting content. I am actually on the kind of the parenting, reparenting side. I'm actually putting together kind of a coaching program, because I have a YouTube channel that I give a lot of parenting advice on. I have people asking me for courses and coaching. So I'm putting something together for that. And I'm working on my next book on legal issues, which will kind of go more in detail with the copyright stuff, because there are some questions about when you need copyright permission. I'm getting a lot of questions from people. Well, somebody told me, or some lawyer at some big firm or big publishing company said this. Like, well, that's not, they didn't really explain it to you legally. Like, it's, so there are some murky issues that I think people could use some more clarity on. So yeah, I'm working on my next kind of legal book, which will kind of delve in a little more detail on that. And then some other legal issues, contracts and things like that. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. And I'm working on my, I'm about 3/4 of the way through my next novel. So working on that too. So I like to have a lot of irons to the fire, obviously.
And where can listeners find you online if they want to keep up with you?
Sure. So for my legal stuff, the best is my blog, which is lawschoolheretic.com. And my book is on Audible. It's on Kobo, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, if anyone's interested in that. And for my kind of parenting and spirituality content, it's Maria Riegger on YouTube. And yeah, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the main stuff. But yeah, my blog is definitely the place for the legal stuff.
Awesome. Thanks so much for chatting to us today. This has been really insightful, and I hope helpful to authors to at least be able to access your book to get some more details on any legal questions that they may have.
Absolutely. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter. This episode was hosted by Laura Granger and Tara Kremen, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music, as always, is composed by Tearjerker. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.